Hi Global Studies. I wanted to create this video to give you some directions and provide you with a short lecture as we begin our Industrial Revolution unit. So this is the module that we're now on, and as always, you'll start here. So today we're starting the Industrial Revolution. I usually always abbreviate it to IR, so whenever you see that, I mean Industrial Revolution. It was arguably one of the most important time periods in history, and it completely changed the way that humans lived, worked, and interacted with the environment. Like every major shift in history, there were positive and negative effects, both long-term and short-term. So both in the moment where people were experiencing it, and then past that moment, into our present day. Today's lesson is really meant to introduce you to the Industrial Revolution, as well as some of the major inventions of the Industrial Revolution. We will also have a little mini lesson on claim writing. On this page, there will be a link to this video that I'm making right now, and as well as this article. So there will be a point in the video and the PowerPoint where I ask you to pause and read this article. As you read, I want you to define the terms that are in orange in your notebook. Also answer the questions: what were some of the major developments of the IR in terms of production and manufacturing? And what were some of the major positive changes as well as negative changes? The better you take notes in your notebook, you guys, the easier it's going to be for you to use this information later, and you're not going to have to go back and reread or rewatch, as much. And then here is where you will go to get to the assignment. So now I'm going to go ahead and present this. Okay, so our daily inquiry for today is: in what ways did the Industrial Revolution change the means of production? So when I say means of production, what I'm talking about is what was being produced, how it was being produced, who was producing it, and where it was being produced. All of these things changed during the Industrial Revolution. That's why this time period was so incredibly important. It totally changed the way that people live their lives. And so today we're just going to be introduced to how all these things changed. Before we move on, though, I do want you to think about a time period in history when lives changed for humans. Was the change good, bad, both? You can also think about a time period in your life when change occurred. Was the change good, bad, or both? Usually, change is both positive and negative, right? If we think about an example from our lives today, we can think about cell phones. Cell phones have completely changed the way that humans kind of go about their days and lives, and there's been positives and negatives, right? We have so much information at our fingertips. However, mentally, physically, there has been also a lot of negative side effects that have come along with cell phones. So just like all these things, the Industrial Revolution had both positive and negative impacts. The way that we're going to kind of look at this unit as we go through it is looking at, who was the Industrial Revolution positive for? What was it good for? How did it impact people's lives positively? And then also, who was it negative for? Who was it really not great for, and how did it impact people's lives negatively? Both in the short term, in that moment in history, but also in the long term, today and in the recent past. The Industrial Revolution occurred in two waves. Whenever we talk about it in this class, we're normally going to be referring to the first wave, which occurred from the late 1700s to the late 1800s. This is when water and steam power started to lead to machines. And these machines led to factories. So before this, the production of goods usually took place in somebody's home with really simple tools. After this, production moves into the factories using these new machines. The second wave began in the late 1800s. This is when we see the development of electricity, division of labor, and the assembly line. So other things kind of just like contributing to the growth of the factory and machinery, things like that. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is pause and read the article that I showed you on Canvas. You're going to define the orange terms and answer the summary questions in your notebook. And then I also would, just take some general notes as you read. The better notes you have in your notebook, the less you'll have to go back and reread later. So go ahead and pause and read that article. At this point, you should be coming back having read the article. Here's an additional video that we're not going to watch together, but I highly recommend you take about 10 minutes to watch, as it will just contribute to your background knowledge of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so now what we're talking about is argumentation. In this class, we are going to be forming academic arguments. An academic argument is an evidence-based defense of a specific position. So you're taking a stand. When you create an argument, you're trying to convince people that your argument is the best argument by using evidence to support your argument. And there must be room for disagreement. The components of an argument include an introduction, a claim, evidence, analysis, and the evaluation of evidence, as well as your conclusion. And we're going to go over what all these components are as we move through the course. Today, we're mostly focusing on claims. So whenever you have an argument, you have to have a claim. Your claim is your argument. It is your answer to the question, DDQ question that we talked about last class. And you have to have evidence to support your claim. So it's not just, well, I think blah, 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 because I think so. No, you got to have evidence to support it. That doesn't mean people can't disagree with you, but you need to have some evidence to support your claim. Really important thing, guys, I cannot tell you how many times I have to say this throughout the course of a class. I don't ever want to see I think or in my opinion in your writing. Unless I directly ask you, what do you think? I do not want to see that. I honestly never want to see first person. I, me, we, or us, okay? And we'll practice this, but I just want it on your radar that if you're ever writing I think or in my opinion, just don't. And then how do you form a claim? First thing you do is you restate the question, answer the question, and provide your reasons. So when we think about the question that we looked at last class, who was to blame for the violence of the Boston Massacre, the colonialists or the British? Here's an example of a bad claim. The colonialists. You're not restating the claim, and you're not providing reasons. Another not great example is, I think the British because they attacked the colonists. Do not say I think, but take it out. Just cross it off. So you're answering the question, and you're providing a reason, but you're not restating the prompt. So you want to make sure you restate the question. So a good example of a claim would be, the colonists were to blame for the violence of the Boston Massacre because they threatened the British and threw things at them. So I'm restating the claim, I'm providing my answer, and I'm providing reasons. Okay, so we are going to be looking at the inventions of the Industrial Revolution. And after this, at the end of the activity, I'm going to be asking you to write a claim answering this question. To what extent did the inventions of the Industrial Revolution change people's lives for the better? So what do I mean when I say to what extent? To what extent means how much. Possible answers can include to a large extent, which means a lot, to a moderate extent, which means kinda, and to a small extent, which means not really. So an example would be, to what extent is history amazing? If you love history, it'd be to a large. If you think it's okay, it'd be to a moderate. And if you really didn't like history at all, it'd be to a small extent. Okay, so I'm not going to go through and read these, but I just want you to know, so the rest of the slideshow are different inventions of the Industrial Revolution. It has a description as well as a picture. So now what I want you to do is go to Canvas, and if we go back to the module that we were on, and we click on this assignment, it'll look a little different for you guys, but I'll have the picture of the video here. You also have the copy of the PowerPoint here, and you'll be able to make it big so you can go through and look at the invention papers. And then here you'll have the worksheet. So you can open it up and do this worksheet. And so let me explain the worksheet to you. So the inventions of the Industrial Revolution. Question, did the invention of the blank change people's lives for the better? So you're going to go through, let's look at the assembly line just as an example, and you're going to read this, okay? As you're reading, you are trying to come up with 2 positive impacts of the assembly line and 2 negative impacts of the assembly line. And you'll write those here. Although if we're doing the assembly line, we'll be down here. And I want to make it clear that this right here may not say 2 direct and clear positives and 2 direct and clear negatives. You may have to use some critical thinking and think, who would this invention have been good for? Would it have been good for the workers or the owners, the people who are buying the product? And how could it have been negative for those people? Was it good for the environment? Was it good for the people in the moment? Is it good for us today? Right? So ask yourself all these questions even if the answers aren't directly in the piece of writing. So for example, the assembly line, made cars cheaper and more available to people. But for the people who actually worked on the assembly line jobs were very boring and physically harmful. Because, like, for example, with a car assembly line, this guy right here would just spend all day putting tires on, which is hard on your body, doing that same repetitive motion. So that would be a negative. So you'll come up with 2 for each, and then you'll come over here and for each one of these inventions, you will write a claim. So here's an example of what it should look like. The invention of the spinning jenny changed people's lives for the blank because, better or worse. So here, the invention of the assembly line changed people's lives for the blank because, and I want you to come up with 2 reasons, or at least one reason, at least one good reason for each one. And there is no right or wrong answer. So if you think it changed for the better, great. If you think it changed for the worse, great, as long as you include a good reason. Then, once you've done this for all of the pieces of technology that were developed during the Industrial Revolution, you're going to answer our big question. So our big question was, to what extent did the inventions of the Industrial Revolution change people's lives for the better? So you've just looked at them all. Now you've got to come up with a big overall claim that answers that question. So construct a claim for this question. Restate the prompt, answer, and provide 2 reasons. So the way that you're going to restate this prompt is, the inventions of the Industrial Revolution change people's lives for the better to a blank extent because. If you put to a large extent, that means you think that they change people's lives for the better a lot. If you put a moderate extent, that means that you think that it changed people's lives for the better, kinda, but there was also some negatives that came along with it, and you're going to want to explain that in your reasons. If you choose to a small extent, that means that you don't think the inventions really changed people's life for the better and they were more so negative. There is no right or wrong answer as long as you restate the prompt, answer, and provide 2 logical reasons. I mean, a wrong answer would be like you just making stuff up, right? So as long as they are founded in the evidence and that, your critical thinking, then that's what I'm looking for. Once you're done with this worksheet, you'll just go ahead and submit it. I hope you all are having a great week. I will see you tomorrow for our live conference. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to message me on campus, on Canvas. And if not, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.